Jake Harrison had been expecting a routine briefing about xenobiology protocols when he was summoned to the diplomatic court chambers aboard New Geneva Station. What he found instead was a tribunal that looked like it had been assembled to decide the fate of star systems rather than review research procedures. "Dr. Harrison," announced Magistrate Kelvin, her voice carrying the weight of interstellar law, "you stand before this court due to circumstances beyond anyone's control, involving genetic analysis conducted as part of your xenobiology research." Jake shifted uncomfortably in the defendant's chair, still wearing his lab coat and wondering why his routine compatibility testing had required legal intervention. Around him, the chamber buzzed with representatives from a dozen different species, all watching with the kind of intense interest usually reserved for treaty negotiations. "I'm sorry, Your Honor, but I'm not sure why I'm here. My research protocols were all approved by the Ethics Committee." "Dr. Harrison," interrupted a voice that made the entire chamber fall silent. Jake turned to see Consul Thaynara of the Zalani Empire rising from her position in the diplomatic gallery. Nearly 8 feet tall, with the distinctive silvery skin and elongated features of her species, she commanded attention through presence alone. "This is not about your research methods. This is about your genetics." "My genetics?" "The compatibility analysis you conducted for your xenobiology project revealed something unprecedented," Magistrate Kelvin explained, consulting a document that seemed to glow with official authority. "Your human genetic markers demonstrate perfect biocompatibility with the Zalani royal bloodline." Jake blinked. "Perfect compatibility with, what does that mean exactly?" "It means," said Consul Thaynara, "that after 2 centuries of genetic decline in our royal houses, we have finally found a viable breeding partner for my granddaughters." The words hit Jake like a physical blow. Breeding partner? According to the Bloodline Preservation Decree, established under Zalani law over 3,000 years ago, any individual demonstrating genetic compatibility with royal bloodlines is legally bound to enter matrimonial contract for the preservation of the species. Magistrate Kelvin's voice was carefully neutral. "This law predates human contact and is considered inviolable under interstellar treaty agreements." Jake felt the courtroom spinning around him. "Are you telling me that I'm being legally forced into marriage because of a genetic test?" "Not marriage," Consul Thaynara corrected with what might have been sympathy. "Marriages. The decree requires union with all genetically compatible royal offspring to ensure maximum genetic diversity." "All?" Jake's voice cracked slightly. "My 3 granddaughters, Lissa, Vera, and Zara. Each carries different aspects of our royal heritage, and your genetics are compatible with all 3 lineages." The chamber erupted in murmurs as representatives began discussing the implications in a dozen different languages. Jake sat in stunned silence, trying to process the fact that his career in xenobiology had somehow resulted in a court-ordered marriage to 3 alien princesses he'd never met. "Your Honor," he said finally, "surely there must be some kind of appeal process. Some way to contest this ruling?" "The Bloodline Preservation Decree allows for only 2 possible outcomes," Magistrate Kelvin replied. "Completion of the matrimonial contract, or genetic exile for the royal bloodline in question." "What does genetic exile mean?" Consul Thaynara's expression grew grave. "It means my granddaughters would be stripped of their royal status, exiled from Zalani space, and forbidden from reproducing. The political implications would destabilize our entire empire." Jake stared at her, the weight of unintended consequences settling on his shoulders. "So if I refuse, I don't just inconvenience myself, I destroy 3 people's lives and potentially cause an interstellar political crisis." "Essentially, yes." The doors to the chamber opened, and 3 figures entered with the kind of coordinated grace that suggested either extensive training or genetic enhancement. Jake found himself staring at what were presumably the consul's granddaughters, and immediately understood why genetic compatibility had been such a concern. They were stunning, each in completely different ways. The first, who moved with obvious military bearing, had the enhanced physique and alert posture of a career soldier. The second carried herself with the subtle confidence of someone accustomed to diplomatic negotiations. The third observed everything with the intense focus of a scientist encountering a particularly interesting specimen. "Dr. Harrison," said the military one, stepping forward with crisp efficiency, "I am Lissa, heir to the military houses. This situation is as unexpected for us as it is for you." "Vera," added the diplomatic one, representing the political houses. "We understand these circumstances are unusual." "Zara," said the scientist, tilting her head as she studied him, "of the academic houses. Your genetic profile is truly remarkable from a biological standpoint." Jake looked at the three of them, each clearly intelligent, accomplished, and probably as thrilled about this arrangement as he was. "Ladies, I have to ask, how do you feel about suddenly being assigned a husband you've never met?" "Honestly?" Lissa said with what might have been relief at his directness. Confused, concerned, and curious about how human courtship customs might factor into Zalani matrimonial law. "Diplomatically speaking," Vera added, "this represents an unprecedented intersection of ancient law with modern interspecies relations. The precedent we set here will affect policy for generations." From a scientific perspective, Zara concluded, the genetic implications are fascinating, but the ethical considerations are deeply troubling. Jake felt a surge of respect for their honest responses. "So none of you are thrilled about this either?" "Let's just say that, arranged marriage to maintain genetic diversity wasn't exactly how any of us planned to spend this year," Lissa replied with dry humor. Magistrate Kelvin cleared her throat. "The court recognizes that this situation is complicated by the intersection of ancient law with modern ethical considerations. However, the legal reality remains unchanged. Dr. Harrison, you have 72 hours to make your decision. And if I need more time to understand what I'm deciding." The diplomatic quarters were luxurious by station standards, but felt cramped when shared by four people trying to navigate the most awkward situation in interstellar history. Jake sat across from the three granddaughters in what the station optimistically called a conversation area, while they all attempted to figure out how to proceed. "So," Jake began, then immediately realized he had no idea how to continue that sentence. "Perhaps we should start with basics," Vera suggested diplomatically. "What do you know about Zalani culture beyond what was mentioned in court?" "Honestly? Almost nothing. My xenobiology research focused on metabolic compatibility, not social structures." Jake gestured helplessly. "I know you're a matriarchal society, that you have some kind of genetic caste system, and apparently you have really old laws about marriage contracts." "That's actually more than most humans know," Lissa said with what might have been approval. "The genetic caste system is more complex than most outsiders realize, though." "How so?" "We're not divided by genetic superiority," Zara explained, settling into lecture mode. "Different family lines developed specialized capabilities over millennia. Military houses like Lissa's family line have enhanced physical capabilities and strategic processing. Diplomatic houses like Vera's have empathic abilities and social intuition. Academic houses like mine have accelerated cognitive processing and analytical skills. And the royal bloodlines? Combine elements from all three," Vera said. "Which is why genetic diversity is so crucial. Without new genetic input, the royal houses lose their ability to bridge different aspects of Zalani society." Jake studied the three of them, beginning to understand the complexity of what he'd stumbled into. "So you're not just princesses, you're living symbols of your entire civilization's genetic heritage." "Essentially," Lissa confirmed. "Which makes this situation considerably more complicated than a simple arranged marriage." "Speaking of which," Jake said, "what exactly does Zalani marriage involve? Because I'm getting the impression it's not just exchanging rings and promising to love each other." The three sisters exchanged glances that suggested this was territory they'd been hoping to avoid. "Zalani matrimonial contracts are comprehensive," Vera said carefully. "Comprehensive how?" "They specify genetic contribution expectations, offspring development protocols, household management responsibilities, and political alliance structures," Zara recited as if reading from a textbook. Jake felt his eyebrows climb toward his hairline. Offspring development protocols. Traditional contracts include specifications for number of children, timing of births, and educational responsibilities for ensuring proper genetic expression, Lissa explained matter-of-factly. Are you telling me that your marriage contracts come with breeding schedules? Among other things, Vera said with obvious discomfort. Though it's worth noting that modern contracts allow for more flexibility than traditional arrangements. Jake leaned back in his chair, trying to process the implications. How much flexibility? That's actually part of what we need to figure out, Zara said. The bloodline preservation decree specifies genetic compatibility requirements and basic matrimonial structure, but the specific terms can be negotiated between the parties involved. Assuming all parties agree to the basic framework, Lissa added. Which brings us to the central question, Vera said, her diplomatic training evident in how she approached the sensitive topic. Jake, how do you feel about us? The question hung in the air while Jake considered how to answer honestly without causing offense. I think you're all clearly intelligent, accomplished individuals who've been put in an impossible situation through no fault of your own, he said finally. I think this whole arrangement is insane from a human perspective, but I'm beginning to understand why it makes sense from a Zolani one. That's refreshingly honest, Lissa said. What about attraction? Zara asked with scientific directness. Zolani marriages typically involve romantic and physical compatibility as well as genetic considerations. Jake felt heat rise in his cheeks. Well, you're all obviously beautiful. But I don't know any of you well enough to have formed emotional attachments. Which is normal, Vera assured him. Zolani courtship typically involves extended evaluation periods where potential partners assess compatibility across multiple dimensions. How extended? Traditional courtship can last several years, Lissa said. Though obviously our circumstances are more urgent. Because of the political implications? Because of the rival factions, Zara said bluntly. There are elements within Zolani society who view genetic mixing with humans as either an opportunity to exploit or a threat to eliminate. Jake felt a chill. Eliminate how? Assassination, political sabotage, arranged accidents, Lissa enumerated with military efficiency. Several factions would prefer to see the royal bloodlines die out rather than be contaminated with alien genetics. And others see your genetic compatibility as a weapon to be controlled, Vera added. If they could gain custody of you and force the marriages under terms favorable to their political agenda, they could potentially control the next generation of Zolani leadership, Jake finished, understanding dawning. So I'm not just deciding whether to marry you three, I'm deciding whether to become a political asset in an alien civil conflict. Unfortunately, yes, Vera confirmed. Jake stood up and began pacing, his scientific mind working through the variables and implications. What happens if we go through with this? What would our lives actually look like? That depends on how we structure the contract, Zara said. Traditional arrangements would require residence in Zolani space, with specific schedules for genetic contribution and offspring development. But modern interpretations allow for more autonomous arrangements, Lissa added. Shared partnership rather than hierarchical marriage, voluntary reproductive cooperation rather than mandatory breeding schedules. And politically? You would become a member of the royal family with all the privileges and responsibilities that entails, Vera explained. Which includes participating in governance, representing Zolani interests in interspecies relations, and helping to modernize matrimonial law. Jake stopped pacing and looked at each of them in turn. Can I ask you something personal? Given that we're discussing marriage and reproduction, I think we're well past concerns about personal boundaries, Lissa said dryly. How do you three feel about each other? I mean, sharing a husband isn't exactly common in human culture. It's not uncommon in Zolani royal marriages, Vera said. Multiple wives often share political and domestic responsibilities. Plus, we've been raised together, Zara added. We're as much sisters as cousins, and we work well as a team. Though we should probably discuss how jealousy and romantic competition would be handled, Lissa said practically. Jake woke to the sound of security alarms and Lissa's voice cutting through the noise with military precision. Everyone up. We have hostile contacts in 3 sectors, and diplomatic immunity won't protect us if they reach these quarters. He rolled out of bed, still adjusting to sleeping arrangements that involved separate rooms but shared common areas, to find all 3 sisters in full crisis mode. Vera was speaking rapidly into a secure communication device while Zara analyzed data streams on multiple displays. What kind of hostile contacts? Jake asked, grabbing the emergency clothing that had appeared at the foot of his bed. Zolani military vessels, but not ones loyal to grandmother, Lissa replied, strapping on what appeared to be both ceremonial armor and functional protection. 3 different factions have arrived to either claim or eliminate the genetic compatibility asset. You mean me? Unfortunately, yes, Vera said, ending her communication. The diplomatic situation has deteriorated rapidly. Word of the marriage contract has spread through Zolani space, and various political groups are mobilizing to control the outcome. Jake felt ice in his stomach. How bad is it? The purification sect wants to eliminate you before the marriage can be completed, Zara reported, her fingers dancing across holographic displays. The Expansion Alliance wants to capture you and force genetic extraction for mass reproduction programs. And the traditional hierarchs want to modify the marriage contract to ensure they control any offspring. Genetic extraction. Jake's voice climbed an octave. Forced harvesting of reproductive material for artificial breeding programs, Lissa explained matter-of-factly while checking weapons systems. Highly illegal under interstellar law, but they're claiming genetic emergency provisions. This is insane. Yesterday I was a xenobiologist. Today I'm apparently a strategic resource in an alien civil war. Welcome to Zolani politics, Vera said grimly. It gets worse. How could it possibly get worse? Because if any of these factions succeed in their objectives, the marriage contract becomes void, we face genetic exile, and the resulting political chaos could lead to full-scale civil war, Zara said without looking up from her analysis. Conservative estimates suggest casualties in the millions. Jake sank into a chair, overwhelmed by the implications. So my personal decision about marriage has become a matter of interstellar security. Essentially, Lissa confirmed. Though there is some good news. Which is? Station security is excellent, and we have allies en route, Vera said. Grandmother's loyal forces are moving to intercept the hostile factions. Plus, the legal complications work in our favor, Zara added. As long as we remain on neutral territory and haven't yet finalized our decision, interstellar law protects us from forced extraction or assassination. But that protection ends in. Jake checked the chronometer. 36 hours. Correct. Which means we need to make our decision soon, one way or another. The conversation was interrupted by a soft chime from the door, followed by Consul Thainera's voice requesting entry. She entered with a security detail that included both human and Zolani personnel, her expression grim. Granddaughters. Dr. Harrison. She nodded to each of them in turn. I apologize for the escalating situation. What began as a diplomatic matter has become a crisis that threatens the stability of our entire empire. What are our options? Vera asked, shifting into diplomatic mode. Limited and unpleasant, the consul replied. We can evacuate Dr. Harrison to secure human space, which would trigger genetic exile protocols and political chaos. We can accelerate the marriage contract completion, which would provide legal protection but under less than ideal circumstances. Or we can attempt to negotiate with the various factions, which would likely result in compromise solutions satisfactory to no one. What about a fourth option? Jake asked, an idea beginning to form. Which would be? We modify the entire framework. Instead of just negotiating the terms of this specific marriage contract, we use it as a precedent to reform Zolani matrimonial law entirely. The room fell silent as everyone processed the implications. Explain, Consul Thainera said carefully. The bloodline preservation decree assumes that genetic compatibility automatically creates matrimonial obligation. But what if we challenge that assumption? What if we prove that voluntary genetic partnership produces better results than forced arrangement? You're suggesting we rewrite 3,000 years of legal precedent? Lissa asked. I'm suggesting we demonstrate that 3,000 years of legal precedent might be counterproductive, Jake replied. Look at the current situation. Your royal bloodlines are declining precisely because the current system doesn't work. Go on, Zara said, her analytical mind clearly engaged. What if we proposed a new model? Genetic compatibility testing combined with voluntary partnership agreements. Contracted relationships based on mutual consent rather than legal obligation. Royal succession based on demonstrated capability rather than pure genetic inheritance. Vera's eyes lit up with diplomatic possibilities. It would revolutionize not just Solani society, but interstellar matrimonial law in general. And completely neutralize the political factions currently threatening us, Lissa added. Hard to argue against voluntary partnership when the alternative is forced breeding programs. Consul Thainera was quiet for a long moment, her expression thoughtful. Such a proposal would require approval from the full Zolani Assembly. The political process alone could take months. But if it worked, Jake said, it would solve the genetic decline problem while preserving individual autonomy. And it would establish precedents that could benefit multiple species dealing with similar issues. There's another consideration, Zara said quietly. For this to work, we would need to actually go through with the marriage. The legal challenge would be meaningless without a successful test case. Jake looked at each of the three sisters, realizing that somewhere in the chaos and crisis, his feelings about the situation had shifted. He was no longer thinking about this as an obligation imposed by alien law, but as a partnership with three remarkable individuals. How do you three feel about that? He asked. Terrified, excited, and scientifically curious, Zara replied honestly. Strategically sound, politically brilliant, and personally intriguing, Lissa added. Diplomatically revolutionary, socially transformative, and romantically. Vera paused, then smiled. Unexpectedly appealing. Jake felt warmth spread through his chest at their responses. The next 24 hours passed in a blur of legal research, strategic planning, and increasingly personal conversations that happened in the gaps between crisis management. Jake found himself working more closely with Lissa, Vera, and Zara than he had with anyone in years, and the collaboration was revealing aspects of their personalities that went far beyond their formal roles. The legal precedent analysis is complete, Zara announced, looking up from displays covered with Solani legal code that made Jake's head spin. There are actually 14 instances where the bloodline preservation decree was modified through mutual consent of the affected parties. 14 out of how many total applications? Vera asked while coordinating with diplomatic contacts throughout Solani space. Several thousand. So not exactly strong precedent, but enough to support our argument that voluntary modification is legally permissible. Jake looked up from his own research into interstellar matrimonial law. What about the human legal implications? If I'm entering a contract that affects 3 different alien political houses, there could be citizenship issues. Already resolved, Lissa said from her position monitoring security feeds. Interstellar marriage contracts allow for dual citizenship arrangements, especially in cases involving diplomatic personnel. I'm diplomatic personnel now. As of this morning, Vera confirmed. Emergency appointment as special cultural liaison for human-Solani relations. Grandmother pulled some strings. Jake found himself smiling at the efficiency with which they'd solved problems he hadn't even thought to worry about. You 3 work well together. We've had practice, Lissa said. Growing up in the royal households means learning to coordinate across different specializations. Plus, we actually like each other, Zara added with characteristic directness. Which isn't always the case in arranged political partnerships. Speaking of which, Vera said, setting down her communication device, we should probably discuss the personal aspects of what we're proposing. The shift in tone was subtle but unmistakable. Jake realized they were transitioning from crisis management to relationship negotiation, and he felt his pulse quicken. Personal aspects meaning. How do we actually want this marriage to work? Lissa said, approaching the question with typical military straightforwardness. Not the legal framework or political implications, but the day-to-day reality of four people in a romantic partnership. Jake felt heat rise in his cheeks. I have to admit, I've never really thought about how polyamorous relationships function. Neither have we, from a practical standpoint, Vera said. Zalani royal marriages involve multiple wives, but the dynamics are usually hierarchical rather than egalitarian. And we're talking about something completely different, Zara added. Equal partnership between individuals who respect each other's autonomy. So we'd be making it up as we go along, Jake said. Basically, Lissa confirmed. Though there are some obvious questions we should address. Such as living arrangements, emotional boundaries, romantic expectations, physical intimacy, Vera enumerated with diplomatic precision. Plus practical considerations like career coordination and eventually, if we choose, family planning. Jake sat down heavily, the reality of what they were discussing hitting him fully. This is really happening, isn't it? Only if we all want it to, Zara said gently. Jake, you need to understand, we're not going through with this just to solve the political crisis. We're considering it because we've gotten to know you over the past few days, and we think this could actually work. Work how? Well, Lissa said, settling into a chair across from him, you're intelligent, kind, genuinely interested in understanding our culture rather than just tolerating it, and you've approached this entire insane situation with humor and grace. Plus, Vera added, you see us as individuals rather than political assets or genetic resources. That's rarer than you might think, even in relationships that start normally. And from a scientific perspective, Zara concluded, our personalities complement each other well. Your human perspective balances our Zalani approaches, and our different specializations create a stable support system. Jake looked at each of them, realizing that his feelings had evolved far beyond obligation or even attraction. Can I tell you something? Of course. 3 days ago, I was a single xenobiologist whose idea of a complicated relationship was dating someone from a different research department. He paused, gathering his thoughts. Now I'm considering marriage to 3 alien princesses, and the strangest part is that it actually feels right. Right how? Vera asked. Like I've found something I didn't know I was missing. You're each brilliant in different ways, you challenge me intellectually, and you've made me feel more like myself than I have in years. Even though we're asking you to completely restructure your life around an unprecedented legal and social arrangement. Lissa asked. Especially because of that, Jake said with growing conviction. How many people get the chance to be part of something that could literally change the course of civilization? So you're willing to take the risk? Zara asked. I'm willing to take the risk if you are, Jake replied. But I need to know, how do you 3 actually feel about me? Not as a genetic compatibility match or political solution, but as a person. The 3 sisters exchanged glances that Jake was learning to recognize as their method of silent communication. Honestly? Lissa said. I find your combination of scientific mind and emotional intelligence incredibly attractive. Plus, anyone who can handle the political chaos of the last few days without panicking has definite long-term potential. I appreciate your diplomatic instincts and your willingness to consider perspectives completely different from your own, Vera added. And you make me laugh, which is surprisingly important in high-stress situations. You think in ways that complement my analytical approaches, Zara said. And you're genuinely curious about everything, which makes conversations with you intellectually stimulating. And physically? Jake asked, then immediately felt embarrassed for asking. Attractive, all 3 said simultaneously, then burst into laughter at the synchronization. Though we should probably discuss how romantic and physical relationships would work between four people, Vera said when they'd recovered from their amusement. Carefully, Lissa said. With lots of communication and clearly established boundaries. And patience, Zara added. This kind of relationship would require everyone to be comfortable with different paces of emotional and physical development. Jake nodded, feeling relieved that they were approaching even the most intimate aspects of their potential partnership with the same thoughtful communication they'd brought to everything else. So assuming we decide to go through with this, he said, what's our next step? We need to formalize our modified marriage proposal and present it to the Zalani Assembly, Vera explained. But first, we need to survive the next 12 hours. As if summoned by her words, Consul Thaynara entered with updated security reports that made everyone's expressions grow serious. The hostile factions have increased their pressure, she announced. The Purification sect has filed legal challenges claiming that human genetic material would contaminate the royal bloodlines. The Expansion Alliance is threatening to declare the marriage contract void if their breeding program demands aren't met. And the traditional hierarchs are mobilizing political support to force a conventional arrangement. What about your loyal forces? Lissa asked. Outnumbered but holding position. However, we're running. The Zalani Assembly Hall was packed beyond capacity when Jake and his 3 wives-to-be entered to present their revolutionary proposal. Representatives from dozens of species had gathered to witness what was being called either the most progressive development in interstellar matrimonial law or the complete destruction of traditional Zalani society. Distinguished members of the Assembly, Vera began, her diplomatic training evident as she addressed the massive chamber, we come before you not to request permission for our marriage, but to present a new model for genetic partnership that we believe will resolve the crisis facing our royal bloodlines. The murmur that rippled through the assembly suggested their opening gambit had achieved the desired effect, surprise mixed with outrage and curiosity. The Bloodline Preservation Decree was created to ensure genetic diversity and royal succession, Lissa continued, her military bearing commanding attention even from hostile factions. However, 3,000 years of implementation have demonstrated that forced genetic partnerships lead to decline rather than prosperity. Our proposal, Zara added, activating holographic displays that showed genetic analysis data, demonstrates that voluntary partnerships based on mutual compatibility produce superior results across all measured parameters. Jake stepped forward, feeling the weight of hundreds of alien gazes focused on him. 3 days ago, I was legally compelled to marry these 3 remarkable women to preserve their genetic heritage. Today, I'm choosing to marry them because we've discovered something the current system can't provide, genuine partnership based on respect, understanding, and shared goals. The reaction was immediate and intense. Representatives from the Purification sect began demanding he be removed for contaminating the proceedings, while the Expansion Alliance shouted questions about genetic extraction rights. The traditional hierarchs attempted to invoke procedural challenges to prevent the presentation from continuing. But Consul Thaynara rose from her position in the diplomatic gallery, her presence commanding enough to restore relative quiet. Let them speak, she declared. If our laws are strong enough to survive 3 millennia, they're strong enough to withstand 4 young people proposing improvements. Thank you, grandmother, Vera said formally, then shifted back to addressing the assembly. Our marriage contract includes the following modifications to traditional Zalani matrimonial law. What followed was the most comprehensive legal revolution Jake had ever witnessed. The contract they developed didn't just modify existing law, it established entirely new principles for interspecies relationships, individual autonomy, and genetic partnership. Voluntary participation in all aspects of matrimonial obligations, Lissa enumerated, including reproductive decisions, political representation, and household management. Shared authority rather than hierarchical structure, Zara continued, with decisions made through consensus rather than patriarchal or matriarchal dominance. Recognition of individual identity within partnership structure, Vera added, preserving personal autonomy while creating collaborative strength. And, Jake concluded, establishment of new precedents for genetic diversity through willing cooperation rather than legal compulsion. The debate that followed was fierce, lasting over 6 hours and covering everything from constitutional law to biological ethics. Representatives argued about the implications for traditional family structures, the potential impact on genetic planning, and the precedent this would set for other species facing similar demographic challenges. But the turning point came when a representative from the academic council asked the question Jake had been hoping for. Dr. Harrison, you claim that voluntary partnership produces superior results. What evidence do you offer beyond theoretical analysis? Jake smiled, exchanging glances with his 3 partners. Practical demonstration. He gestured to Lissa, who activated a holographic display showing tactical analyses they'd completed together during the recent crisis. Combined human and Zilani strategic approaches that achieved objectives neither could accomplish independently. Vera followed with diplomatic communication records that showed successful negotiations with multiple hostile factions simultaneously. Collaborative diplomacy that prevented armed conflict while preserving individual faction interests. Zara concluded with scientific research data that demonstrated breakthrough discoveries made possible by combining human intuitive approaches with Zilani analytical methods. Innovation through perspective integration rather than genetic dominance. And personally, Jake said, his voice carrying to every corner of the vast chamber, 3 days of voluntary partnership have produced stronger emotional bonds, better communication, and more effective collaboration than most people achieve in years of traditional courtship. You're asking us to overturn millennia of legal tradition based on 3 days of personal experience, demanded a representative from the traditional hierarchs. We're asking you to recognize that 3 days of voluntary cooperation achieved what centuries of forced genetic partnerships failed to accomplish, Lissa replied firmly. Stable relationships, innovative solutions, and genuine affection between partners. Plus, Zara added with scientific precision, our genetic compatibility analysis shows superior reproductive potential compared to previous royal marriages, precisely because voluntary participation reduces stress factors that inhibit fertility. The chamber erupted in discussion as representatives debated the implications. Jake could see the political calculations happening in real time, some factions recognizing the revolutionary potential, others desperately trying to preserve existing power structures. The assembly will vote, announced the presiding magistrate. All in favor of accepting the modified marriage contract as presented and establishing it as precedent for future Zilani matrimonial law. The vote was closer than Jake had hoped but wider than he'd feared. The Progressive Alliance, combined with pragmatic representatives who recognized the failure of current policies, provided enough support to carry the proposal. The motion passes, the magistrate declared. The marriage of Dr. Jake Harrison to Princesses Lissa, Vera, and Zara is hereby recognized under modified Zilani matrimonial law, and the principles established in their contract are approved for implementation in future genetic partnership agreements. The celebration that followed lasted until dawn, but Jake found the most meaningful moment came later, in the quiet of their shared quarters, when the 4 of them were finally alone together as legally married partners. So, he said, looking at his 3 wives with wonder and affection, how does it feel to be married to someone who accidentally started a social revolution? Like the beginning of something unprecedented and wonderful, Vera replied, settling against his side with content exhaustion. Like we've achieved something strategically significant and personally satisfying, Lissa added, taking his hand in hers. Like the most interesting scientific collaboration of my life just became permanent, Zara concluded, her analytical mind already planning their future together. Jake pulled all 3 of them closer, marveling at how a routine genetic test had led to the love of his life, all 3 of them. What happens next? He asked. Next, we prove that revolutionary legal precedents are just